Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another day uh, trying to educate and raise awareness. Today, I am honored to have Mr. George Scott with me here. We are going to talk about different social issues and talk about the voting, why voting matters. I am not going to talk a lot. We're going to discuss during the show, but I will let Mr. George introduce himself and tell you who he is. And take it away, George.
All right. Well, Hagir, thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I know you have folks that follow you not just from here within South Central Pennsylvania, but from across the U.S. and I believe even some overseas. So it's an honor to be with all of you. And I am George Scott. I'm running for state senate in Pennsylvania's 15th district, and that district encompasses almost all of Dauphin County and all of Perry County. And my background is I grew up here in South Central Pennsylvania. I grew up on a family farm and went to public schools. Was fortunate enough to be able to go off to get a college education and learned how much that costs, which is a challenge even more so today. But really, I've spent my life in service, and so I've served 20 years on active duty as a United States Army officer in both peacetime and wartime. And for the last 10 years, I've served in ministry. I'm an ordained Lutheran pastor, and I'm currently serving a congregation in Perry County. And my wife and I live in Harrisburg in Dauphin County, and we have three very needy dogs, one very relaxed cat, and I've got two kids, both of whom are out of high school, and my daughter just graduated college, and my son is just finished his freshman year at college. And really, I'm running because I've got to see up close and personal through ministry the kind of challenges that people face on a day-to-day basis, and it's far more than spiritual challenges. It's just challenges oftentimes about how am I going to pay the bills at the end of the month, and where's the next meal coming from for me and my family, and how can I have one steady job instead of two or three part-time jobs. There's just so many issues that folks are dealing with, and all of that, of course, was before COVID-19. Now with the pandemic, it's just even more challenging, and there are more and more people that have been affected as this unfolds. So I'm really interested in making sure that we not only win the election, but more importantly, bring integrity and compassion to Harrisburg and focus on issues that will really improve the lives of people on a day-to-day basis. So making sure that we have healthcare that's accessible regardless of where you live and affordable, particularly for things like prescription drugs and bringing an end to surprise medical billing. I want to make sure that our public schools are as strong as possible so that no matter what zip code you live in, your son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter can get a good quality education. And I want to make sure that we strengthen and reform our state government. We've got a system set up really where there's way too many irregularities in campaign financing. It's one of the worst systems in the whole United States. And then we've got some issues as well in terms of things like our voting system. We've had some really good things happen recently, and I hope to talk about those more later on. But for example, our districts get gerrymandered every 10 years, and we need to bring that to an end. We'll be redrawing our electoral districts next year, 2021. So very important that we make sure that we elect representatives who will allow voters to elect or select their districts rather than have representatives select districts that work only for them. So those are a couple of the big issues that we're really focused on. Very excited about the race. We had a primary election that we came out of with almost 73% of the vote. Feel really good about that, but know that we've got a lot more work to do between now and November. And I've got a great team, and we're going to do everything possible to bring home victory here in the 15th district.
Thank you, George, for the introduction. This is very important to everyone that is listening to us right now to know who you are. I have few pictures from before, and before we dive into some sensitive topics that we want to discuss, do you want to talk to us about this this picture?
Yeah. I'm as I said, I'm a Lutheran pastor, and so when I go to work in ministry, that's typically how I dress, and that's our tradition is to to wear a collar, and we're a mainstream Protestant denomination, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which is actually quite progressive in its views, and I'm very proud to be a minister in that tradition. I went to seminary right down the road in Gettysburg, and served a pastorate down in East Berlin for several years, and now I'm serving in as I said, in Perry County. But one of the things that is really rewarding about ministry is you get to interact not just with your congregation but with the local community. So one of the ministries that we ran was we had a monthly food pantry, and we'd have folks come through there every month. And a lot of times people think a food pantry is for people who are strictly unemployed, but a significant percentage of the folks that came to our food pantry were people who were employed but just couldn't make ends meet. And we see even more so now with COVID-19, the need for food from things like the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank and local food ministries, feeding ministries, has gone through the roof. And that's because we have a lot of folks that are living right on the edge. United Way did a great study that came out last year that talked about a group they referred to as ALICE.
Mm-hmm.
ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So
Mm-hmm.
these are people who are working for a living but don't have any savings, don't have any wealth accumulated. So they're one major bill away from being in a crisis. And when you take the number of folks in that status, coupled with the folks who are living below the federal poverty level, we've got some major challenges here in our district.
Yes, yes, we do. I'm showing some of your old pictures so people get to know you more. I typed your name a while ago, and I was always supporting you from 2018 and before. But I learned a lot about what you did in the past, and thank you for your service. And a lot of people did not know your background. This from this picture, basically.
Yeah. So I'm standing there wearing a parachute. I spent 5 years at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is where most of the Army's airborne units are located. And so I got to make a lot of parachute jumps while I was there. Actually, this picture is, though, from Tunisia. I was in Tunisia for a year and got to do some airborne operations with Tunisian forces. And this was right before we got on the plane. And yeah, I loved serving as a soldier. It was a great experience, and got to deploy to Panama and to Saudi Arabia and to Kuwait. Also served 15 months in Korea along the demilitarized zone with the Second Infantry Division. And yeah, it's a real honor to serve in the military. But after 20 years, it's a very young person's occupation, and so I retired and moved on into other things.
So I think the main reason I brought those two pictures, and there's more out there for everyone or anyone wanted to know more about Mr. Scott's history. What do you think those past experience will bring to the table, and what will make you unique to our voters?
Well, it's a great question. So I think, Kajir, what makes me unique is my background is almost exclusively in serving others. And that's really kind of what I learned from my parents is the importance of of giving back to the community and giving back to others. So my dad served 31 years on active duty in the Army, and my mom worked for the International Monetary Fund after coming to the U.S. after World War II. But yeah, so they served the local community for years. I saw them, learned that ethic from them, and I think that's what I bring here is having served our nation and having served the community, I understand the needs of both our institutions and just folks on a day-to-day basis. And I think that ethos, that focus on service, is really something that people are ready for. We have too many elected leaders who are focused on their own interests, their self-interest, or on the interest of certain special interest groups, that particularly ones that maybe are supporting them. And we've got to get beyond that. We've got to get folks elected who obviously you're affiliated with a party. I'm a lifelong Democrat, but my interest is to serve the people. The people come before the party, and I think that's what most folks want.
Thank you very much. That will bring us to what issues do you see here in Pennsylvania that you might, I mean, you're not just going to be focused on your district. I'm sure when you are there, you are going to be the voice for all of us. You are going to speak and help with main or major issues. What uh, issues that you think now on the top of your head, for example, that might be important to us? And there's questions coming, some questions are coming. I'm going to read them to you as we go. But until then, what issues that are or could be important to the voters or the listeners now?
Yeah, well, the first issue that I think is important to voters is healthcare. That was important before the pandemic, and what the pandemic has shown is it's even more important. So, um, for people to be able to have accessibility to a hospital or to a clinic is important anytime, but particularly during a pandemic. There were people that didn't feel comfortable being able to go to a medical facility because they didn't have proper insurance, or if they had insurance, they couldn't afford the deductible. Fortunately, a lot of the hospitals work to waive those things, but we've got to have affordable and accessible health care. And that's regardless of whether you're living, in a very small rural setting, or whether you're living in downtown Harrisburg, or whether you're living in the suburbs. Everybody needs and wants that. That's a common concern. And too often you hear stories of people who are, for example, who are going to work and they don't have health care, or they have health care with a job and they stay with that job only because of the health care, not because they're enjoying the job or they feel like it's making the best of them. But I'm looking forward to getting elected to work on issues like that. Also want to work with Representative Kim, who's with us now on raising minimum wage, which is, I know, an issue that she's really been at the forefront of, and also there's a whole host of other issues, but those are some of the top ones.
At this point, I'm going to introduce Patty Kim. I am one of your top fans. As you know, I cannot speak about what you have done to the city, to all of us and women. You are an idol for many, and I am sure that there's a lot of people that don't know you from my show, because we are watching different countries as well. If you heard me at the beginning, if you can introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are, and then we can have a combine or joint discussion between you and Mr. Scott. We can hear you, Patty. Here, I think you're muted. All right. Did you unmute? We still can't hear you. You getting there? No, we still can't hear you. Do you hear us well? I see you are muted. Unmute yourself. Nope, it's not working. You want to try it? I'll let you work on that. I'll keep you up here, work on that until we hear your voice, and I will continue with Mr. George Scott. Okay, so there is a question from Jack here. He said, why has the Republican Party getting the vast majority of evangelical voters, although democratic principles seems more in line with the teaching of Jesus?
Yeah, that is a tremendous question, Jack, and I think it's one of the reasons why I think it's important for me to run. I'm running to be a state senator, but I do think my background in ministry is important, because as you say, there has been a tendency for folks on the Republican side of the aisle to really dominate this issue. And I agree with you 100%. What I see when I read the Bible and read Scripture, particularly the teachings of Jesus, is an emphasis on not only loving God but loving our neighbor, and our neighbor is the person that's in need. If you look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's all about helping someone in need. And the Samaritan was the one that would have been least likely to have helped that person who was injured, beaten, robbed, lying on the side of the road. And we see this, again in Matthew's gospel in the 25th chapter when it talks about when Christ returns. It talks about how people will be judged, and they'll be judged based upon how did they help the orphan or the widow or the person who was hungry or the person who was in prison. I think these are fundamentally at the core of who we are as Democrats, and so I do think it is important for people of faith to talk about their faith and how that influences their political views, and yet at the same time recognize that we don't want to mix church and state. I never go to political events wearing my pastoral clothing. I just don't feel like that's appropriate. But we do have to reclaim this narrative. I think it's a great question and an important question in this time and place.
Perfect. The second question I got is, what is your professional opinion on the Trump administration and Trump's competency as a leader? That's a big question, but
yeah, that's a loaded question.
I know.
I recognize President Trump is our elected president, and there is absolutely respect that should come with that office and with the person that serves in that office. But I'm deeply concerned, and I mean deeply concerned, about how the president has conducted himself from really even before he took office, from the campaign and throughout his presidency. He has chosen to be a very divisive figure, and he has chosen to focus more on just a certain portion of the U.S. electorate rather than all people. The president's supposed to be the president of the United States, not the president of one party or the other. And I think those concerns have grown over the past few years. And I think we see more and more people in positions of influence speaking out as well. I've been very encouraged by the number of current and former military leaders who have spoken out in recent weeks over their concerns about how the president has chosen to use the military in cases where we have some degree of civil disobedience, and that's a big issue, a big concern of mine as well. So I hope that we are able to have a fully open and unrestricted election, that no one works to try and disrupt it in any way, and people recognize that, particularly in the time of the pandemic, with everything else going on, we must continue with this election. It's a critical election for us, not just for this year, but for the road ahead.
And Patty, can we hear you? You are still on mute.
Oh,
there you are! Yay! I don't know why your voice comes and goes. No. Oh. I don't hear you still. No, we can't hear you. I am not sure what is happening. Maybe try to log out, X out, and try to come back again. I am so sorry. We need to hear you. We have to hear your voice. Going back to the Trump administration and everything that they represent, there are so many issues that currently happening, and I will leave it up to you to discuss what you feel comfortable that you want to discuss with your listeners now, in regards to everything happening, starting with the systemic racism to the LGBT rights and the current death, or George Floyd, the protests, everything happening now. It's affecting us as a country, and it's affecting our image to the world. So
Right.
what do you want to say about that?
Well, I think that the murder of George Floyd and of others is something that has finally seemed to awaken the United States in a way that may potentially this time finally bring about real substantive change. We've racism is in many ways, to borrow religious terminology, the original sin of our nation, and we've never fully come to grasp with it. Even though we eliminated slavery over 150 years ago, racism is still deeply embedded in our society. And I know a lot of folks, good folks, who will tell me, "Well, I'm not racist, and I have nothing to do with slavery and things like that." And yet, for anybody who is white, we have a responsibility to recognize that we're benefiting from a system in ways that others don't. And I don't know if you're familiar at all with Ben and Jerry, who make Ben and Jerry's ice cream, but they told and illustrated this in a way that I thought was really powerful a couple of years ago. I got to hear them speak at a rally down in Washington, D.C., and they told their story of how the great success that they had enjoyed from coming together, knowing each other from college and beyond, and all the good things that they had worked so hard to accomplish. But then one of them told it that way, and the other one said, "Now let's tell that same story, only in this case, we're people of color." And so things that happened to them, like one of them got arrested in college for possession of marijuana and got off fairly free. When they retold the story, it ended up in a criminal record, which then prevented them from qualifying for a loan. When the time came to them for them to buy a house in a good neighborhood, they were redlined out. So there are all kinds of things structurally that our system needs to address through legislation and through other means. Beyond that, though, there's a responsibility to speak out individually. We have got to come to a point where we recognize that silence is complicity. And so if you don't say anything and there are racist actions or racist comments being made, uh, your silence is seen is essentially as an endorsement. So I'm really, in many ways, heartened by what's happening right now, by the fact that the protests have been going on for a couple of weeks. Certainly, I don't support, and I don't think any of us support the destruction of property or any other types of violence. But these acts of disobedience have got to be paid attention to, and we've got to now turn that political protests into political action. And that's why we need to have strong, committed leaders elected in places like the state Senate, so they can join alongside Representative Kim in the state House, and also get them in U.S. Congress. Our Auditor General, Eugene DePasquale, we've got to make sure that he wins that election as well, so he can go down there and fight at the congressional level, the federal level, get the change that we all know we need to see. So I know it's a difficult period for folks, but this is a period that's long overdue. And I really hope and pray that we'll see some long lasting, significant change to our laws and policies here at every level, local, state, and federal.
And this is a very important point you just brought. The protest is there. A lot of people are not or not trying to understand why people are protesting now. It is okay for some not to understand because they did not live or feared or had this experience happen to them. But the least they can do is try to understand, listen, and have an action or take an action. And one of the things that we can do as citizens is to vote. And I cannot stress this enough, not just at the presidential level, but like Mr. Scott said, for the Senate seats, the House representative, even any office that you can elect and have your voice heard, please do that and practice voting and ask for your right. My second question will be in this subject: what can we do as community, as society, and what can we do to talk to you guys, to talk to our candidates or our elected officials, so they can make a difference, so we can get laws and regulation in place?
Yeah, well, the best way, there's all kinds of activist groups that are out there. If there's an issue that you're passionate about, like I see Heather's got a question on climate change, there's all kinds of groups out there. Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania, Sierra Club of Pennsylvania, Citizens Climate Lobby, that are people who are like-minded and concerned about that issue, who then organize and reach out to and lobby their elected officials. So that's one way. Find a group that shares your values, get involved with them, make sure that your voice is joined with others, and they'll provide you with the tools on how to talk to your legislators and influence them on their decision making. So whether that's through phone calls or emails or rallies or things like that. I think one of the most important ways is to make sure that you vote for people who are committed to listening to you, and so that means holding actual meetings with voters, not just one-on-one meetings with folks who are wealthy, but things like town halls. So I've committed to hold at least one town hall a quarter. Obviously, if COVID-19 is still around, we'll have to do that virtually. But my hope is eventually to be in regular meetings with constituents throughout the district, to sit and listen about what are the issues that are keeping them awake at night, and then to try and move forward with solutions that will actually address those issues. So just as an example, one of the issues that I've learned from talking with folks here just within the past 2 months, 2 or 3 months during this pandemic, is broadband internet. We have got a real issue, and we knew this, but the pandemic exposed it even more. We've got a real issue with access to broadband internet, and it's an issue that actually brings together the folks living in urban areas and the folks living in rural areas. So, for example, in parts of Perry County and northern Dauphin County, there's not reliable internet access for them. And so that's a big issue when you're trying to do distance learning for school students, or you're trying to run a business. And that same problem exists in certain neighborhoods right here in Harrisburg, where people don't have reliable internet access, or if it does exist, they can't afford it. So we've got to figure out a way to address that as we go forward.
Thank you. That was Heather McDonald. She was running here in 87th District, and she's an amazing, amazing person. My advice, keep trying, Heather. We will support you next time and keep your voice and just fight, keep fighting. There's a question here. What can you do as a legislature to make a change?
To address climate change or legislation in general?
Legislation in general. And I believe that was before Heather's McDonald's question. So it's probably regarding there's another question about the police reform also. So I believe it's the same topic.
Okay. So to make change in terms of the police reform, I think what we need to do is look at the recommendations that have been provided. There's 8 distinct recommendations to include things like citizens advisory councils and other such measures, which have been suggested as a strong starting point for reform. And so I think at all levels, at the municipal level, especially because that's where so many of these decisions are made with hiring and employment of police officers, to see if those measures are appropriate and as much as possible to apply them. Because we've got in our police force, the standards are largely set at the local level. There are not a lot of really national standards for policing, and so it varies from state to state and from municipality to municipality. And I think the vast majority of our police officers are committed to serving and protecting their community, but there are some standards that, particularly when it comes to use of force, that we need to take a hard look at. And those may be areas where we need at a minimum state standards and I would say even federal standards. We saw, for example, I don't know how many of you had a chance to see the shooting in Atlanta that just happened recently, where the gentleman was at a Wendy's in a parking lot. I watched the video of that this morning. He was very reasonable. And granted, he clearly was under the influence of alcohol. And then when they tried to arrest him and he took off, deadly force was employed. And I think that was just a complete overreaction. He had a taser with him, but he did not have any type of weapon that could.
Deployed, wasn't it?
What's that?
The taser was deployed before he ran.
It was deployed before he ran, and he had one of the police stations that he had with him. But again, he was running away from the officer. That the initial investigation shows the shots were in the back. I mean, that's not a situation where deadly force should be employed. When someone's running away from a police officer, unless there's a reason to believe that he is an immediate threat to other people around him, deadly force should simply not be used in that case. So again, I'm not a police officer, but I did spend 20 years in the Army, and I know something about training. I know something about standards.
Yeah.
I know that in Iraq in 2006, when I was there as a contractor, there were significant issues with the use of force. And so the theater commander, General Casey, said, hold on, we're going to relook this from top to bottom. And
Yeah.
so he and his team got together. They put out new rules of force, rules on the use of force, and made sure that everybody in theater was trained to that standard. And there was a significant decline in the number of innocents that were killed through excessive friendly fire.
And I think this is the main point that people are arguing about on social media now, with trying to figure out, was he wrong or right? I don't think this is the point. If you allow me to say my personal opinion, it is never okay to kill someone unless, like you said, they possess a danger to others or to the police officers. In this case, like you said, he was running away. He wasn't holding any gun. The taser was deployed, even if it wasn't. It was intoxicated. This will bring me to our not just laws and regulation, but what can we do to ensure that the police are trained, well educated about all those situations. As a nurse, I was put on so many rotations to get to know my patient in any situation that might happen in the future. I don't have to, like, I can't say I dealt with every rotation that I worked in, but just in case if I had a patient who is intoxicated or suffering from depression or any other issue, I will know, I will have that base understanding to deal with this person. Can we make sure or ensure that is happening to our law enforcement officers, or that's something hard to do?
Well, I think we can if the people who are appointing or electing, depending upon the situation, the law enforcement officers are willing to make hard decisions. We saw in recently here the mayor of Atlanta make the decision to really to get directly involved in this case, and I think that was important. As we step back from that, though, I think what we see is that there are a lot of cases where we have local police chiefs who are trying to do all the right things. They're trying to train their officers, and I know, for example, the other night I heard a case involving the chief of police in Hershey, and he's heavily committed and has done extensive training with his officers on these kinds of issues. And that's the kind of leadership we want. We want leaders that understand that appropriate use of force is important and that they have to make it a priority. And then if they're not willing to make it a priority, then they need to be replaced. And if they have officers that are not willing to abide by those standards, then they have to take action to either disciplinary action or, if appropriate and severe enough, action to relieve them from their duties.
Okay. When I look away, I'm trying to read the comments that are coming and some question that they sent to my messenger. So I apologize if I'm away from the camera. Someone asked if you can speak about current disobedience and obviously racist. I think Mr. George already addressed some of that in coming election and kicking off Republicans out of the political field. I think that's our goal. I'm not sure if there's anything that you want to add to this area about what we can do as citizens here to make our voice heard and help switching all the states to blue.
Yeah. Well, I think what we've got to do is two things. Number one, we've got to make sure that everybody who can be registered is registered. There are a lot of folks out there that, for whatever reason, have come to the conclusion that, oh, maybe my vote isn't important, maybe it doesn't matter. If there's ever a time when your vote matters, it's now. And the good news is Pennsylvania has taken some significant steps recently to make voting easier. And so I encourage folks, if you're not already registered, go to the website. It's votespa.com. That's VOTESPA.com. And it will walk you through there how to register to vote. So that's number one. Number two is I encourage folks to make use of the mail-in balloting option. That's new for us here in Pennsylvania this year, thanks to legislation passed by folks like Representative Kim. And it was a great success overall during the primary. There's still some glitches to work out, but register for a mail-in ballot so that if you've got a health issue, a work issue, something else going on, you can make sure that you vote. You can pick your who you're going to vote for in the privacy of your home, have time to make that decision. That's a really good option. And then I think you have to talk. You have to say to folks, hey, look, I'm voting for Patty Kim. Here's why. And tell them personally, your personal endorsement carries tremendous weight.
Mhm.
And so if you do that for folks like Patty, like myself, like Eugene, like others, that will go a long way in terms of making sure that we have good representatives at every level of government in every assembly.
So the main point, everyone listening to us now, or they're gonna view this live later, nothing simple, nothing small you can do to make this happen. We can do it, and we will do it. But we just have to keep fighting harder than before, and make sure you talk about your representatives, about your candidate that you're voting for to others. I know all of us grew up listening to their parent or grandparent saying, "Don't talk about politics or religion." Please do. And it doesn't matter if you get people angry. When you keep hammering on an issue, they will get it at some point. Welcome, Patty, and we are so glad you are able to join us. Can you please introduce yourself to everyone listening?
Yes, let's give George Scott a break. He did a great job. This was the George Scott Hour Show, which was not supposed to happen. And the host, thank you so much for having me. I am so sorry. I changed from iPad to iPhone, and I think this was the right way to do it. So thanks for having me. My name is Patty Kim. I just ran for the state representative of the 103rd District for my fifth term, and I was successful along with George Scott, and we thank all the voters for their support. I have been working on three issues that we've made some progress on, but we still have a lot to work to do. I call it the three E's. It's the education, making sure that every student, no matter what zip code they live in, have all the opportunities, the resources, and it's equally spread out. So equitable education is a top priority of mine. Economic justice, raising the minimum wage. I've been working on this for almost 8 years now, and it has been such an uphill battle. Um, I want to get discouraged and kick stuff around, but this is a long game. Being in the majority helps a lot.
Mhm.
People don't understand that when the majority is in place, so we have a Republican majority in the House of Representatives, they get to choose a speaker, and the Speaker of the House picks and choose what is to be voted on. It's an incredibly powerful position. And so the bills that I have reintroduced every term has never been put up or called up in committee to even have a discussion,
Mm.
not even a discussion. So, I'm not saying anything about me understanding Black Lives Matter, but I do understand that when you're not being heard, you speak up a little bit, you speak louder until you're yelling because nobody's listening to you. So I've been going to these rallies, raise the wage rallies for years and years and screaming to get this done. But until we're in the majority, we cannot do this. And so that's why election matters. If raising the minimum wage $15 an hour matters to you, then go vote. We just passed a clean slate bill that is going to help a lot of people with charges on their record that have been dismissed. Do you know right now that if you get arrested and they drop the charges, it's still on your record? So you have to go and get a lawyer to clean that off, go through the court system and whatnot to get it off when you were never indicted. So
I did not know that.
yes, so these are some, and I love that you wanted to talk about systemic racism, but this is just another hurdle for a poor person who got caught up in something and can't afford it, and so therefore it's on your record. What do employers do? The first thing they do if they want to hire someone, they look at your record, and it's there, and it's a stain, and it's very difficult to have a first impression, the benefit of the doubt, when you have something hanging on your record. So second chance is really important for me. We've been working hard on that, and thankfully, I feel like I have to catch up, and I'm going to talk a little too fast. But we all know that back in the 90s and the 80s when we had that terrible crack cocaine issue that was happening mostly in the urban areas. And so, what was our response? It was to be tough on crime and lock up all the bad people who are on drugs, and then now we have the opioid crisis, and that has touched people in the suburbs, it's touched people in the rural areas, and they're more Caucasian. They're less suburbanites. So how do we react? Nope, we don't lock them up and put them away. We have therapy. We have resources for them. We have, programs where they can get off their addictions, which is great and important. But because the color of the face has changed, because it hit home for lawmakers in rural areas where they decided that now this is a problem that we can address in a compassionate manner. It is so frustrating to represent people of color and finally see, I'm not saying it happened yesterday, but finally see what they have to go through. Hurdle after hurdle, discrimination over discrimination, stereotype. The first time I was meeting with an African American man in my office when I first got in as state representative, he came into me all dressed up, and he showed me a folder of all of his credentials. They were all they were putting in, in those page protectors and whatnot. And he's just, this is a certificate that I received. This. And I'm sitting here like, why is he showing me all this? He wanted to show me that he is worth meeting and talking to show his worth, that I'm here. I want to ask you, you may just see me as, a minority, but I'm here. These are my credentials. Can I ask you something? And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, get rid of this folder. I'm good. He's not used to being given the benefit of the doubt, to be seen at face value, that he had to prove himself to me. And so that was just like a kick in the gut for me, because I have not lived that way. I am a minority, but I don't think I've been discriminated that hard before. And it was just eye-opening. And I am so grateful for my experiences, being in the minority, being made fun of, being pushed to the side because I didn't look and act like people, because that is stained in my head. It is stained in my head that when I walk through the door of opportunity, Michelle Obama said this in the DNC, when you walk into the door of opportunity, you can do two things. You can keep the door open and let others come through, or you can shut the door. You can shut the door. So George and I are the type of people that when we walk in, we're going to try to get as many people at the table, to give them a voice, not just those who could sprint the fastest, who have the most money, but those who we have forgotten, that are on the sideline because they just couldn't get into the race. So it is my goal to make sure that our voices are heard, everybody's voices, because we are a stronger community for that. And so I went off on a terrible tangent, but economic injustice, expungement, and education are my 3 E's that we're making progress on. It's a long game again, but if we get in the majority, it will be so helpful in getting some of these priorities done.
And I think I just want to add something to your experience as a minority myself. I can go on and talk for days about the same guy that walked to you. It's different for me now, but I had to work 5 times, not 2 times harder. I had a lot going on for me. I was a woman, a Black woman, immigrant had an accent, or I still have one. So it doesn't matter how much education I have, how many references or certificate I have in my folder, I was still unable to secure a job that someone in a different level, as I am academically or intellectually, will be able to accomplish. This is a huge issue, and that will bring us to other issues like white privilege, which I discussed previously on my show. A lot of people don't understand what does that mean, and I think this is never a time or a place to discuss racism or white privilege. It's all the time. This is something everyone need to discuss and talk about. But Patty, what are you bringing to the table? I know what you are bringing to the table, but other people out there might not know why they should vote for you. And what are we going to do beside the three E? What are you going to do to help Georgia Scott or anyone else in the Democratic committee? And what can we do as citizens to help you guys achieve that? You and George.
Okay. Wow. Lots of questions in one. Happy to answer that. So this is a part of, we are in a historic time. We are at a pivotal time in history right now where unfortunately it's been four tipping points that Black Lives Matter. We have a real problem in our country and we need to do something. And before we say, let's go charge and do another march, we have to look inside us.
Mhm.
Okay, a lot of people, let's say non-Black folks, say I'm open-minded, I'm progressive, I'm not racist, and we're fine. We're fine. These are the same people, and I'm putting myself in the same category where we have benefited off a system that oppresses Black and brown people.
Mhm.
And a friend of mine, colleague on the House floor said, Patty, did you read White Fragility? And I was like, no, I haven't. By Robin DiAngelo. I highly recommend it. I didn't have time to read it, but I watched one of her hour-long lectures, and it was eye-opening. It was eye-opening. Somebody who I, you know, have worked with African Americans for a very long time, still need to check myself. We all need to check ourselves and why and how we operate things, way we do things. And we have to check ourselves and we have to figure out how we can be helpful and to make sure that we can break down the system that only benefits the wealthy, the white, and those with resources. And it's really, really important to do that. And what I notice with my colleagues in the House, whenever my Philadelphian colleagues come up and speak passionately about justice, I see body language, and everyone's just like, oh gosh, all they hear is screaming. And
Mhm.
I've explained to you why we scream is because no one's listening to us, and justice is not supposed to be negotiated, it should be demanded. And when I see a homicide or 14-year-old who died on his way to the grocery store, no relations to gangs, just was caught up and was killed. People don't think, white people don't think that Black and brown people experience pain. It's so weird. It's so strange that oh, that mother, either that child probably not deserved it, but the child probably was in a gang and therefore, it happened. Seeing crying mothers, for some reason, they don't empathize a mother losing their child to homicide.
Mhm.
There's a disconnect. And so that's why our empathy, needs to come out a lot stronger, especially, and I'm calling out people of faith. George Scott, this is not about you. I promise you, you're on the same team here. But people of faith need to rise up. They need to rise up and say, our brothers and sisters are in pain, and we need to stand up and support them and demand justice as well. This is not only a Black and brown issue. And I'm going to just tell a really quick story. I like to go hiking. That is the only way that I experience peace. I go out to where there's no cell phone, Wi-Fi, And we went to a game land just nearby, and it was just a beautiful day, just my husband and myself. I was going along a path. It's spring or summer now, and everything's beautiful and green. And I look at the path and I see some weeds on the path. And I said, you know what? Even the weeds are beautiful because everything's so green and fresh. And then I said to myself, why am I calling this weeds? These are just like the trees and plants on the side. It's just that we don't want them there.
Yeah.
Black and brown people have been called weeds for a very long time.
Yeah.
And we have tried to pick up these weeds and put them away in segregated housing. We try to pick up these weeds because they are very inconvenient. We don't want to see them here. And then we throw into a certain, school district because we don't want to see these weeds.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking down at a population. And little do we know that these weeds turn into these beautiful trees left and right of us. But we have suppressed their growth and their progress. And we think that the weeds are the problem. It's the weed killers that we try to just disseminate. The weed killers. What happens when you put too much pesticide in the ground, right? It
Kills everything.
everything. It hurts everything. We need to stop suppressing Black and brown people. We are only hurting ourselves, and we don't need to see them as inconvenient or they're going to take away any of our progress or our success. We need to change our mindset. Why should people get excited for voting? We need to change leadership. We need to change leadership in terms of who is in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot think that by preventing immigrants from coming in is going to make our country better.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot think that gassing people down and pushing quiet protesters is okay. We cannot allow a president to use our ignorance to change the way we see things by untruths and just not facts. We have to be smarter. We have to be better, and we need a better leader. And I'm hopeful that Biden will pick a running mate that we can relate to,
Mm-hmm.
and that will put emphasis on our urban areas and make sure that we have representation for all of us, not just a few.
And talking about unity, I want to hear from both of you, why should the Democrat focus on who is running now, which is Mr. Biden? I know I discussed this with you, Patty, and with you, George, as well. A lot of people vote for Bernie from before, and there are strong Bernie supporter who will not give their voice to Hillary Clinton from before. What can we do to avoid this from happening and unite everyone? Starting with you, George.
I think we need to make sure they understand, and I know they know this already. I'm not trying to speak down to anybody who might be a Bernie supporter, but just to drive home again, literally the stakes and how high they are. Patty talked about it, and I think Joe Biden hit it on the head. The soul of our nation is at stake in this election.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you were a strong, dedicated, committed supporter of Bernie, that's great. But Bernie himself has gotten behind Joe. So if you're committed to your candidate, then get behind your candidate and support Joe now. This is, too often as Democrats, we tend to fall in love with our candidates rather than to fall in line. This is a case where we need to fall in line. We need to get lined up behind Joe Biden and make sure that he wins the election, the presidential election. And if we do that, that will help folks here in Pennsylvania and across our nation. So I just think it's part of making that personal appeal to say, look, if you don't vote for Joe Biden, you're essentially doing a vote for the incumbent. And I think the vast majority of the people, at least all the Democrats, recognize that that's not a great solution.
Patty?
I can't really add too much to that. I think Bernie Sanders really helped the dialogue in challenging the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
Bernie Sanders had picked issues that were really important to, especially the millennials. They say I was, born during the recession. All bad things have happened. Like, we need not just, little change. We need major changes.
Mm-hmm.
And Bernie Sanders heard them, put policy in place. And unfortunately, he didn't win, but I think he made Biden a better candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Has his ears out, knowing that it's super important to listen to those voices who are usually, not prominent or in the forefront. So thank you to Bernie Sanders and his fans for making Biden a better candidate and widening the tent even further out. But we all need to come together under this tent because the priorities are all the same, and it's people first. And I think Biden will be that measured leader that we need so desperately right now to get us out of this economic crisis and the pandemic. We need his voice, and so we all need to link arms and vote. I think for Biden and whoever he picks as VP.
And I think George, you said something earlier about we cannot all agree on one candidate. That was just a discussion between you. I do mind repeat that because I thought that was very important.
Yeah, a lot of times folks will focus on a candidate and say, well, my most important issue is this, and I don't agree with this candidate on this issue, therefore I can't vote for this candidate. And what I always tell folks is, you're never going to find a candidate that you completely agree with on every issue. You know, Patty and I, we are very like-minded, and yet there are issues where we have different positions on them. That doesn't mean that we can't work together on all the many issues that we can. So if you want a candidate that you're going to agree with 100% of the time, then run for office yourself. If you're not willing to do that, and by the way, it's really hard to do it, if you're not willing to do that, then find somebody that you do think shares your values, most of them, and get behind them and support them, and just keep speaking out your voice on the issues that you care about that you think they're not on board with.
Very good point. All right. The last thing I want to, and I really thank both of you. I don't think 1 hour is enough. And I'm sure if you guys have any time in the future, our listener would love to hear from you. And there's so many issues out there that we need to discuss, and they want to hear what you have to say about it. But the last thing I want one of you, Patty, or you can talk a little about that to explain how people can register to vote and find out if they are already registered.
Sure. I did the mail-in for the first time. It's a no excuse ballot where you can vote 50 days in advance of the actual election day. And it is, I cannot say anything bad about that process. There are times where I've gone into the polling place and I'm an elected official where I will look at a name, a judge's name, and I'd be like, who in the world is this? And I get, surprised. This time you can see the ballot, do your research, Google whatever, take your time, sit on it for a couple of days. And then when you're ready, you mail it in. It is a beautiful process. And I am so grateful that we have that. So votespa.com is all you need to go to. It is the one-stop shop. And it even confirms and shows you where your ballot is in the process. It's safe. I promise you. Dauphin County triple checked the ballots, the write-in ballots and the absentee ballots, and did a really great job. I want to shout out to Jerry Fieser of Dauphin County for that monumental task. But it's a safe process. It's an easy process. And I hope that in November, that we all go out and vote who we want slowly, do our research, and vote a way that will help us in our day-to-day lives. So
you said votepa.org.
Yeah, .com.
.com. Okay, I will write that down for everyone here, and we will put some links as well. That's the mailing ballot.
That's voter registration. That's how to register to get a mail-in ballot. That's pretty much like Patty said. It's the one stop. So if you want to find out, am I registered to vote? You go to that page, go to the register to vote menu, pull it down. You can check your voter registration. You can do it right now at votespa.com. It is really easy to use, and it's great. Just check it out.
We can share that because, like I shared with you earlier, some people went to vote and they found out that they were registered somewhere else. So we lost few votes because of technicality. We would like to increase awareness and do your research, like Ms. Patty Kim said. Learn about your candidate and see why you need to support them or go behind them. And that's part of we're doing now. We're trying to introduce some of our leaders and good people out in the community who are willing to put the time and serve. So what we can do at least is to get behind them, support them, get them to office, and tell them exactly what we want from them. So for everyone watching us now or going to watch us later, listen to the whole live and share your comments, suggestion for next time when we have Patty Kim or Georgia Scott or any other candidate, and vote. Just vote. Why don't you guys say last words to your listeners, and what advice or what do you want them to know before we close this live?
Should I go, Patty, or do you want me to? Do you want to go first?
Oh, go.
I think Patty may be frozen, so I'll go ahead and go first.
Yep. You put her up again because she froze. Okay, there she is.
I'll just close by saying, this is a critical time. This is the year that we need to make sure that people hear their voices. If you're tired, if you're not happy with the way things are going, then please register to vote and tell others to do the same. Make your voice count. It's the most important thing that we've got going on. So votespa.com.
Thank you very, very much. I think we lost Patty, but I appreciate your time and your effort, and I am really thankful and honored for you being with us today, and hopefully we will have you back again at some point when you have time. For everyone who is watching now and listening, we thank you very much, and Patty's back. No, it's okay. It's all right. It's okay. This is part of the corona that we have to do it this way. But go ahead.
And I think the question was last words and why we should go out and vote. Is that fair to say?
Fair.
Okay. If you want to see a higher minimum wage, go out and vote for those who support it. If you want safer neighborhoods, if you want police reform, go out and vote. A lot of people think, I've voted, nothing happens, I don't see any changes. There are changes that will happen. Last year in the municipal election, there was only 17% of Dauphin County that came out to vote. 17%. And what 17% means to elected officials means that we're not watching or we don't care.
Yeah.
It sends a message, a negative message that, we're not watching. Thankfully, in the primary, it was about 38%. We need to go much higher, and we will see changes. I promise you. People, again, I know the disenfranchised say, nobody cares. It doesn't make a difference. It does make a difference. So there are issues in front of us, especially we saw the essential workers, especially the low wage workers. They need more rights. They need workers' rights. They need a higher minimum wage. We need to support our workers because they were there for us during the pandemic. We need to show them that they are essential, pandemic or not, and we need to give them the sick leave and whatever to help them take care of their family and be, great, loyal employees. So it does matter. Please come out and vote in November, and let's make some changes. We need your support. We need everyone to support George Scott. I am unopposed in the fall, but I will be doing everything I can to make people like George Scott get in, where we can be partners in serving those who need our help. So thank you so much for this time, and I really appreciate it, and sorry for the technical issues.
No problem. We appreciate both of you. We know you guys are busy, and you took the time to come here and talk to us, and that means the world to me and my listeners, I'm sure. I just wanted to say one thing, that Miss Patty or Mr. George, they cannot read your mind. Communicate with them. If you want to change, talk to them. Say, this is not working. I want this to be done. And what can I do to help? So please vote, go on their website, share your comments, suggestions, and do your part. And then you can complain and say, I did all of that and nothing happened. And then we will have a different conversation. But I want to thank both of you for taking the time, and I wish you the best. I will be behind you 100%, and I'm sure a lot of people will do anything. So if there's something that you want us to do, just write it in your page and it will be done.
Thank you,
That's
Hagir.
good.
You guys have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye, George.